Welcome to yet another spine-chilling night of horror, where the twisted and bloodthirsty roam free. Tonight, we embark on a journey through the macabre mist of blood, delving deep into the unimaginable horrors that our fellow mortals have faced while wading through the crimson haze. The putrid stench of death lingers in the air as we witness the gruesome fate of those who dared to venture forth into the unknown and were forever swallowed by the relentless and merciless violence that surrounds us. So steel your nerves and brace yourself, for there is no telling what terrors await us on this blood-soaked path.
So this isn't something that happened to myself. It was something that happened to my mother. And even though it's terrifying, it's a story that I beg her to tell me because it creeps me to my core. I'll try and do it justice, but no one can tell it like she can. At the time this happened, my sister was an infant, maybe 6 months old, which would make this roughly 18 years ago. My mother has been a waitress almost all her life, working at various restaurants, bars, and golf clubs. During this particular time, she worked for a bar. It was Halloween. She had gotten off of work and she was having a small get-together of just a few people at her place to have a few drinks and to play some cards. I was staying with my grandparents for the weekend. She invited her manager, and at the time a very good friend, home with her to join in on the festivities. He got incredibly drunk. My mom can handle drunk people pretty well, but there was something off about him. While they were playing cards, he got this blank stare on his face, starting making all kinds of weird grunting noises and howling. They were playing rummy, and the only thing he would put down was 666. He was freaking everyone out, and it was late, so she put him to bed on the couch since he was in no condition to be driving home. She went to bed with her boyfriend, and my little sister was sleeping in a crib next to their bed. Apparently, my mom and her boyfriend fooled around a little bit and ended up passing out. Shortly after she fell asleep, she could hear and feel her boyfriend and her manager roughhousing in the bed. Thinking her manager was just drunk and wandering around the house, she kept telling them to stop or they'd wake up the baby. Her boyfriend didn't say a word, but seemingly got more and more upset as the play fight ensued. They tumbled around in the dark before exiting the room, and her boyfriend slammed the door and yelled for her to lock it and get my sister somewhere safe. My mom locked the door and turned on the light. There was blood everywhere. My sister had blood splatter on her face, my mom was covered in blood, and the bed was soaked in it. Not knowing what was going on, my mom took my sister, put her in her car seat, and hid her in the closet. My mom then got dressed and worked up the courage to try and find her injured boyfriend outside the room. When my mother opened the door, here was her manager slouched over about a foot in front of the door, almost like he was touching his toes, but couldn't quite reach them. He was wheezing, but not moving, not blinking, just slouched over. After realizing he wasn't going to move, she crept behind him and went to go and get her roommate to help her find her boyfriend. She came up to the bathroom first, where she banged and banged for whomever was in there to let her in. After a few minutes of trying to convince them to open the door, my mom's boyfriend finally gave in and opened the door. My mom was able to see the extent of what she thought was a harmless fight. Her manager stabbed her boyfriend in the face. He cut his cheek open from an inch in front of his ear down to his mouth, where it was literally hanging on by a thread. You could see the entire inside of his mouth, gums, teeth, everything. They freaked out for a few minutes, but then decided it was time to retrieve their roommates, my baby sister still sleeping away in a closet, and go try to call for help, because this was mid-90s and no one had cell phones. My mother opened the door, and her bangled bracelets made a bunch of noise, and the manager snapped out of his trance, and in the most evil way, jerked his head toward them and started to grunt. Her roommate and his girlfriend came out of the room, and the manager diverted his attention to the roommate's girlfriend. He chased her out the apartment and down the street with a big-ass kitchen knife. My mom got my sister and ran like a bat out of hell to the neighbor's house. My mom's boyfriend ended up having almost 400 stitches put in his face, 100 put in his gums, and like 20 put in his tongue. And the police didn't find the manager until later the next evening. He was found in the woods, laying on the ground. He didn't speak. He was just panting and staring at the sky. My mom hasn't worn bangled bracelets since.
My experience with the Church of Scientology. This happened when I was around 17 years old and is still happening now. At 17, I felt lost in the world and stuck in a job I disliked with work colleagues that didn't like me. This had to do with my accent, as I was quite well spoken, so they thought I was a rich kid. It all started on a Friday after work. The factory I worked in had a half day on Fridays, so I would just spend the rest of the day wandering around the city I lived in. It had been a tough day of relentless mocking, and I was reaching my breaking point. I went around the city looking for a new job. I visited the police recruitment center, the army, Navy and Air Force centers, and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to get away from it all. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets and still no idea what to do with my life. I turned a corner and immediately saw a sign sitting in front of me. I can remember it so vividly now. It said, "Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in." I then looked up at the building, and in a big fancy sign outside it said, "The Church of Scientology." Now before I continue, yes, I already knew about Scientology, however. I had a morbid curiosity about it. I had heard all the horror stories and goings-on inside the church, but Tom Cruise was my favorite actor, and he seemed to have his life sorted out pretty good. My famous last words right there. So, I went inside. I was immediately greeted by a very nice lady. She asked me how I was doing and what she could do for me today. I asked if I could speak to somebody about the church and the personality test. She smiled and said, "I would be happy to. Please take a seat and I will get you someone to speak to." After a minute, I was introduced to an older man named Alan, and he was the head of my city's Scientology center. Alan took me to a small room to talk privately. When we entered, I immediately noticed the large picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down and genially had a nice talk. I told him about how I was unhappy about where my life was going. I told him about how I wanted to leave, plus all the trouble I was having at work. He seemed genuinely concerned for me, and I felt like he wanted to help. After a while of talking, I agreed to do the personality test. He gave me the test and left the room, saying to give the test to the receptionist after I had finished. 2 hours later, I finished it. Not joking, that's really how long it took. It was around 500 questions about anything and everything. I handed it in to the receptionist, and she told me it would take some time to process. In the meantime, Alan had told her to take me to their private cinema and show me a film. I thought it was just going to be some old room in the back with a TV on the wall, but no. They did indeed have a private cinema. It could seat around 50 people and had a large screen in the front. It did feel a bit weird just being by myself in a cinema owned by Scientology, but I bet that hasn't happened to many people. Or maybe it has. Anyway, I sat down, and they played me the film. It was about 30 minutes long and consisted of a narrator explaining those strange feelings you sometimes get, with some mediocre acting following along. I remember a section about how much you doubt yourself, knowing you have locked a door but going back to check multiple times. At one point, the film showed how a past event that happened to your mother while she was pregnant with you could affect your life in a negative way. Example: your mother was sick on a flight, so you are scared of flying. I also vaguely remember something about rotten eggs and how much an event involving them can hurt you. I know it sounds absurd, but in some ways the film really made sense to me. When the film was done, I was taken to Alan's office and he told me my results. He told me I was extremely depressed, one of the most unmotivated people he had even met, lacking cognitive thinking, and I was a waste of talent. Now this made me very upset, but Alan said he could help me. He gave me about 4 books and a DVD. He told me to read the books and watch the film before my course. I asked, "What course?" And Alan told me he had signed me up to do a course at the center. He convinced me that if I didn't do this course, that my life would soon spiral out of control. He made me hand over quite a lot of money for the course and said I would receive an email about the course, which was in a month's time. I left the center, ran home, and immediately started reading the books I was given. This happened all over the weekend. I had basically locked myself in my room and did nothing but read and reread those books and watch the DVD over and over again. Over the next week, I began taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan with questions and concerns. I started resenting my mother for my life. I began to think that she was the problem, that everything bad that happened to me was the result of her. I started to treat her badly, swearing at her, and did the best I could to ignore her. When I emailed Alan about my mother, he told me that if she was the catalyst for my problems, then maybe I should consider disconnecting from her. And I took that bullshit seriously. I made plans to totally leave her out of my life. A week before my course, I developed some kind of god complex towards everyone around me. What I read in those books told me what I could become. I saw everyone in my family as below me. I really became a truly spiteful person. Just days before my course, I was confronted by my mother and father. They said they were concerned about me and they searched my room. My dad took out all of my Scientology books and the DVD. I was outraged. I screamed and cursed at my parents. I said horrible, wicked things to them. I told them how I was going to leave them and how I never wanted to see them again. Hours of arguing back and forth, tears and crying. However, in the end, they did convince me that the church was a bad place. They said, if I was so miserable at work, I should have told them. And that is true. To this day, I can't believe I didn't say anything to them. Instead, I went to Scientology. That night, after the arguing had stopped, they sat me down and comforted me. I really couldn't believe it. After the way I had treated them for the past 3 weeks, they still cared for me. The next day, I emailed Alan and told him I would not be coming back to the church. He quickly got back to me asking why, asking if it was my family and if I was being forced to not go. However, I ignored him. The emails I revived in the next few weeks were mad. He told me stuff like, I should leave my family now and I could stay at the church. He tried to convince me that it was all because of my mother. He even emailed me to say something along the lines of, he won't be surprised if he read in the papers that I was found dead by suicide. I'm very sure he crossed a line there, but I just kept ignoring him. The strangest email I got was one in all binary code. 0011010111 this and 1000101110 that. I used a binary code translator, but it all came back as mixed up letters and numbers. None of it made sense. I eventually blocked him. However, it still hasn't stopped. About 2 or 3 times a year I will get an email from the church. It's either asking how I am or asking about my family. When I get them, I immediately block the email address. But they just keep coming. It's always someone new, saying they heard about my case, and they were worried about me. The whole reason I'm writing this is because I just got one the other day and I thought it would make a good warning. Please, I beg of you, do not go to a Church of Scientology center. If they can make me into a spitefully degenerate in just a few hours, then what can they do with a person in a few months or a year?
I was 12, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so just told him, yeah, sure. Whatever you need to do. I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room, the typical girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait, if Daphne isn't here, who is that?" I said. "He's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s, and obviously weren't going back in the house to call authorities on the landline phone. Then my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO, she was home alone, and authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay, though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and say she'd been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but fear not. He was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s, so in any case he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action. False meter reader, let's not meet.
I'd like to share with you a series of horrific events from my childhood that we never had a real resolution to. There were some suspects, but no one was ever brought to justice. Also, there have been a lot of terrible things happen on my mom's property, and that's another story. But here's part of the beginning. This part of the story happened roughly around 1990 during my summer break from school, but continued on for quite some time. I must have been about 2nd or 3rd grade age. I grew up with just my mom. My dad was never in the picture, so we lived alone until I was about 12, when she remarried. Our secluded country neighborhood was safe for the most part, and all of our immediate neighbors were elderly, save for one couple who had a few young adult sons around my brother's age. For the most part, though, didn't have much riffraff in the area. At first, there were only minor clues to indicate something was going on, such as things being moved in the backyard. And I guess because my mother has always been a paranoid conspiracy theorist, she had an idea that something was happening. I didn't really know this until I heard her talking about it much later after the events. She tried to hide things so they wouldn't scare me. She even started sleeping in my room with me at night, probably because she was paranoid. But I assumed it was because we could stay up late and watch movies together and eat snacks. One morning after I got up, I noticed that our old wooden back door had huge chunks missing out of it around the part where the lock bolt goes into the door frame. It was as if someone was trying to chip away at the locked part. I showed Mom what I had discovered, not realizing why the door was damaged, and she went completely silent, pale-faced and panicked. I could tell something was wrong, but I was too young to understand that someone had apparently tried to break in, either in the night or when we were out. That day, she mended the door to the best of her ability, and if I remember correctly, she even put a new, different lock on it from the hardware store. She also filed a police report, but there was nothing they could do. I had a German shepherd named Munchie. He was a big spoiled baby who loved raiding the fridge with me, but to a stranger, he was probably very intimidating. He was my best friend and very watchful over me, and I still miss him to this day. For a week or two after Mom and I would go to bed, Munchie would start pacing and whining and acting very anxious. Since we lived in such a rural place with no imminent danger, we thought, Mom would frequently let him outside by himself. So one night, when he was acting exceptionally strange, she let him outside alone. We didn't have central air because our house was old, built in the 50s. We were poor, and Kentucky summers weren't really too hot anyway. At night, Mom would open up all the windows in the house, with the halfway burglar latch, of course. Since she was in my room with me watching a movie, we had both my bedroom windows all the way up. My back window overlooked a bit of a hill, which gradually sloped into a low, wide bottom. The bottom was full of tall weeds and bushes. Suddenly, we heard movement in the brush of the bottom. Munchie. Then we heard him snarling like a werewolf. Mom got up and ran to the window but couldn't see anything. What we heard next was horrifying. It sounded as if Munchie was attacking someone. He was making those awful noises as if he was eating someone alive. I began to cry, terrified that something would happen to my best friend, and my mom started screaming in horror for Munchie to come home. We heard what sounded like someone escape my dog's wrath and take off through the brush. Mom ran to the back door with me right behind her and called for Munchie at the top of her lungs until he came running back into the house. He was panting and grunting and bristled up. I hugged him so tight I probably nearly squeezed the life out of him. As time progressed, things got worse. Being so young, I didn't know for a long time, but my mom was safeguarding the house. She even moved a tall dresser in front of my window that overlooked the hill and bottom. She tried her best, but whoever was harassing us was finding new ways to make our life hell, or maybe try to kill us. One night, she said she heard peculiar noises coming from the backyard. I don't necessarily remember this, so I called her for details before writing this. The sounds were coming from under the dining room windows, which overlooked the backyard. She turned on the security light on the back of the house and saw a ladder propped up against the back of our house, as if someone was trying to climb through our windows. This incident seemed more like an empty threat than a real attempt, especially considering the back door was probably easier access. We don't know if the person thought the windows would be unlocked or what, but for whatever reason, they gave it a try. Again, she called our local police, and they did nothing. I should probably note that we really didn't have much law enforcement there. You probably wouldn't believe me if I tried to tell you how worthless law enforcement was and still is in that area. On another occasion, and this memory is burned into my brain because it scared me so bad, someone snuck up to my bedroom window one night. I hate to even think what their intentions might have been. Mom had drifted off to sleep, but I was quietly watching the rest of Willy Wonka. I was looking in the direction of my ominous window, the one overlooking the bottom, so I ended up getting a good look at this big white hand, which reached up and slapped my window screen multiple times in rapid succession. I screamed, Mom woke up, and the tormentor took off, no doubt through the brushy bottom. My mom is a dog person. She adores dogs, and has always had lots of dogs and puppies around. We had 7 little black pups, and the mother dog around this time, and they lived outside on our huge property, had plenty of space to play, and a nice big dog house. At some point around the same time this stuff was happening, we had to be out of town for a few days. Mom had some people watching the house, and I guess she didn't really think anything horrendous would happen. Then again, she wasn't aware of how far this thing would go. When we came home, Mom's puppies had been killed and lined up in a row in the side yard, close to my window that overlooked the bottom. This was devastating. The police did little to help, which included telling her how short to saw off her shotgun so that it was still legal, and advising us to keep Munchie in the house. I forgot to ask, but I'm nearly positive Mom ended up sending the mommy dog away to my sister's house on the other side of town. Months later, incidents were increasing in occurrence, and then someone decided to take it way too far. Something hit the back of the house in the wee hours of the morning. Mom looked out the windows and saw nothing, at least not until the next morning. She found a stick with a charred pine knot on it. Someone had apparently lit it on fire and threw it at our house. I assume they were hoping our house would burn. And don't even ask about the cops, because they did nothing. Yet again. I wouldn't be surprised if they knew who the culprit was and didn't care. Then one day, Munchie went missing. He had gone out to the bathroom in the evening before bed, but he didn't come back immediately like always. He vanished. I don't even want to go into detail about this because it breaks my heart all over again, but we found him days later. He had been poisoned. To be completely honest, I could keep going with this story, although it takes a lot of unbelievable turns. Not all of them are horrifying. Some are just ridiculous. Then, around 2009, a multiple-year-long court case began where my mom had to fight a group of her neighbors in court to keep them from stealing her property. Those events led us to believe the people involved with that case may have had something to do with the torment we experienced all those years ago. But honestly, all we can do is assume. So, Tormentor, I wish we could meet. but you're a coward who harasses women and children and hurt animals.
Greetings, mortal. How delightful to make your acquaintance. Your bravery for traversing through the thick mist with my kin and me is impressive, but don't be too hasty in your gratitude. Beware of the scarlet venomous mist that lurks around, for it has claimed many unwary souls. You may rest now, but do not let your guard down, for our journey is far from over.